The mountain wind moved through the tall pines with a cold warning sound as Thomas Martinez knelt beside the still body lying on the rough ground. His loyal dog, a large German shepherd named Bear, had been the one to find her. The dog had barked and pulled Thomas toward the rocky trail until they discovered the woman only a few steps away from death. Her dress, once sky blue, was torn, dirty, and stained with blood. Her face held scratches and bruises that told a painful story. Her skin was pale and cold. She looked as if she had been walking for days without food or rest. Bear touched her hand gently with his nose and let out a sad, soft whine. Thomas placed 2 fingers near her neck, a weak pulse, slow and fading. "You're safe now," Thomas said in a low voice, trying to calm himself as much as her. "I've got you. You're safe." His hands shook as he lifted her into his arms. She felt too light, like someone who had gone hungry for far too long. As he lifted her, a small piece of paper slipped from her dress and began drifting away in the wind. Thomas caught it quickly before it could fly off the cliff edge. He stared at the letter and everything inside him froze. It carried the official seal of the Territorial Marriage Bureau. The name written on it made his heart stop. Victoria Powell, his promised bride, the stranger dying in his arms, was the woman he had waited 3 long months for. The woman he thought had changed her mind. The woman he believed would never come. Thunder rolled across the mountains as Thomas carried her toward his cabin, Bear walking close by with worried eyes. Each step felt unreal, like a dream or a cruel trick from fate. 3 months ago, Thomas had received a letter saying Victoria Powell had agreed to marry him, a widow from St. Louis. She was supposed to travel west to meet him in September, but September came and went with no sign of her. He convinced himself that she had simply chosen a better life elsewhere. After all, he was just a quiet man, living alone in the mountains with his dog. He never imagined she might still be coming and fighting for her life to reach him. Thomas pushed open the cabin door. Warm fire light greeted them. The small cabin was simple but neat. A bed in one corner, a table, 2 chairs, shelves of books and supplies. A place built for one man who had given up on ever needing more. He laid Victoria gently on the bed. Her breathing was weak, but still there. Bear sat at her side, refusing to move away from her as if guarding her. Thomas worked quickly. He cleaned her face and wounds with warm water. He did what he remembered from his time as a soldier. He had learned how to treat injuries when he served in the war. Her skin was cold, but not lifeless. She was fighting to hold on. Thomas kept glancing at the marriage letter resting on the table. He whispered her name again, as if hearing it aloud would help him understand. "Victoria Powell, you came all this way for me." Outside, the storm grew stronger. Rain hit the windows and wind shook the door. Bear did not leave Victoria's side, watching her with loyal, protective eyes. Thomas sat beside the bed through the night. He gave her small sips of water when she stirred. She didn't wake fully, but every small movement gave him hope. As he watched over her, Thomas remembered why he had written to the Marriage Bureau in the first place. He had been alone for 5 long years after leaving the army. He had built this cabin to escape the noise of the world, the memories of war, and the pain that never stopped following him. Bear had been his only friend, but even a loyal dog couldn't fill the quiet space inside a lonely man's heart. He wanted a partner, someone to share the silence, someone to build a life with. He didn't need love at first sight. He just needed someone who wouldn't run from his scars, seen or unseen. Victoria's letters had been warm but careful. She had sounded like a woman who carried her own troubles, too. Maybe that was why she agreed to marry a stranger who lived far from the world. Lightning flashed through the windows. Victoria moved slightly, a faint sound escaping her lips. Thomas leaned closer. "It's all right," He whispered, "You're safe. I'm here." Quote, for the first time in years, he felt something inside him that he thought had died long ago. Hope. The first light of dawn crept through the window when Victoria finally opened her eyes. Her eyelashes fluttered as she tried to understand where she was. Thomas leaned forward, speaking softly. "My name is Thomas Martinez." He said, "I found you yesterday. You're in my cabin. You're safe here." She tried to speak, but her voice was dry. Thomas helped her drink some water. "Thank you," she whispered at last. Her gray eyes stared into his, confused but alert. She took a slow breath. "The stage, there were men. They robbed us. They left me behind." Her voice shook and her body trembled from the memory. Thomas listened, his jaw tightening with anger at what she had suffered. But before he could ask more, she noticed the letter on the table. She stared at it, then at him. "You're Thomas Martinez," she whispered, her eyes filling with emotion. "You're the man I was coming to marry." Quote, Thomas felt his heart pound as the truth settled between them like a weight too heavy to speak of yet. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am." Her eyes softened, then filled with fear. Before Thomas could ask why, Bear stood up suddenly. His ears rose, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Thomas froze. Something or someone was outside. Bear's growl grew deeper as he stared at the door, his body tense and ready. Thomas quickly stood and moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to look out. The early morning sun lit the trees outside, but something red moved among them, a man's coat. Someone was out there watching the cabin. Thomas lowered the curtain slowly and turned to Victoria. Her face had gone pale. "They said they might come back," she whispered. "The men from the stage, they thought I was hiding something valuable." Thomas grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "How many?" he asked. "3. Victoria said. "Maybe 4. Bear paced near the door, ready for Thomas's command. Thomas checked his rifle and gave Victoria his revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" Quote, she nodded weakly. "My father taught me." "Good. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Bear, you shoot. Don't wait, don't warn. Shoot outside." 3 men on horses moved toward the cabin, trying to stay hidden. Their faces were rough and cold. These were not men seeking shelter from the storm. These were hunters looking for their prey. The leader, a tall man with a thick beard, stopped his horse near the clearing. "Hello, the cabin," he yelled. "We're looking for a woman, might be hurt. We can pay for information." "I've got nothing to say to you," Thomas answered. "Turn around and leave." The bearded man laughed, but it was not a friendly sound. "We know she's in there. We tracked her blood trail right to your door. You have 1 minute to send her out. After that, we come in shooting." Victoria's hand shook around the revolver. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. "They'll kill me." Thomas looked at her and saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Strength. She had survived days alone in the mountains. She was a fighter. "They won't take you," he said. His voice held a promise stronger than iron. "I will not let them touch you." As the men moved into position, Thomas slipped out the back door with Bear. The storm from the night before had left the ground wet, helping to silence his steps. The men focused on the front door, unaware Thomas was moving behind them. Gunfire exploded as the bearded leader shot through the cabin window. Glass shattered. 2 more shots followed. Victoria ducked but steadied herself, gripping the revolver. "You missed," she shouted back, surprising herself. "Try again," Thomas almost smiled. Even weak, she had fire. One of the bandits stood near a fallen log. Rifle raised toward the cabin. Bear growled, distracting him for just a second. Thomas struck fast, hitting him on the head with the rifle butt. The man dropped silently. Thomas moved again, circling behind the second man near the north side of the cabin. This time he fired. The bullet hit the man in the chest. He fell instantly. Only the leader remained. He cursed loudly when he realized his men were gone. "You think you've won?" the leader shouted. "That woman carries papers that can hang half the territory. Men will keep coming for her." Thomas stepped out from behind a tree, rifle raised. "She doesn't have them anymore. They're gone." The leader hesitated, uncertainty in his eyes, but his pride was bigger than his fear. He ran toward the cabin, firing wildly. Thomas pulled the trigger. The leader fell into the mud and didn't move again. The fight was over. Bear checked the bodies, then returned to Thomas, tail low but calm. Thomas went inside. Victoria still held the revolver, ready to fire, though her hands shook. "It's over," Thomas said gently. She lowered the gun, but her knees gave way. Thomas caught her and helped her sit. "Are they dead?" she asked. "Two are. The youngest is unconscious." Victoria stared at the tied-up young man when Thomas carried him inside. He couldn't be older than 18. His face was pale and frightened. When he woke and saw Thomas, he panicked. "You're alive," Thomas said, "for now. Whether you stay that way depends on how honest you are." The boy swallowed hard. "My name is James," he said. "James Mayers." He looked at Victoria with shame. "I remember you. You tried to help that older woman on the stage when she was shot." Victoria leaned forward. "Mrs. Patterson, she gave me something. Papers, important papers." James nodded miserably. "She was my aunt. She worked in the territorial capital. She found proof that powerful men were stealing land and money. She was taking that evidence to the federal marshal in Denver. Green sent us to stop her." "Green?" Thomas repeated. "Charles Green," James nodded. "He owns half the territory. Politicians, sheriffs, judges. He controls many of them. If your names are linked to those papers, he won't stop until you're dead." Victoria's voice was low but steady. "The papers fell from my dress. They're gone." James shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Green doesn't know that. He'll keep hunting you." A heavy silence filled the room. "So, what do we do now?" Victoria asked. Thomas looked at her, then at James, then at the mountains outside. "We fight," he said. Victoria stared at him, surprised. "Fight, yes, but smart. Not here, not alone. We take the evidence to Denver to the right people." Victoria looked at him with something new in her eyes. Trust. "And we do it together," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Together." Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, as if warning them that their true battle was only beginning. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." The air in the cabin felt heavy with the weight of their decision. Leaving the mountains meant giving up safety. Going to Denver meant walking straight into danger. But staying meant certain death. Thomas knew it. Victoria knew it. Even young James, weak and shaking, understood there was no turning back. They prepared through the night. Thomas packed supplies. Weapons and the small leather journal with Mrs. Patterson's written evidence. Victoria folded the marriage bureau letter and tucked it safely into her pocket, as if it were the final piece of courage she needed. By sunrise, they stepped out of the cabin, leaving behind the only safe home Thomas had known in 5 long years. The journey through the high mountain trails was rough. Ground was still wet from the storm. Sharp rocks, narrow paths, and cold winds tested them with every step. Victoria pushed herself despite her injuries. James struggled with a cough that grew worse. Each day, Bear stayed on alert, nose to the ground, ears raised, guarding them with every stride. When night came, they found shelter beneath a rocky overhang. The small fire Thomas built barely chased away the cold. Victoria sat close to him, wrapped in his coat, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Yes," Thomas admitted, "but not for myself. For you." Victoria lifted her head to look into his eyes. "Whatever comes, we face it together. You saved me, Thomas, even when you didn't know who I was. I won't run from you now." Quote. Her words warmed him more than the fire ever could. The next day, snow dusted the high trail. Bear suddenly froze, his body stiff, ears pointed. Behind them, Thomas turned fast. 3 figures were following at a distance. Riders armed. They found us, James whispered. We keep moving, Thomas said, fast. The trail narrowed into a dangerous pass. One wrong step meant a fall to the jagged rocks far below. They hurried across the ledge, but behind them, the riders grew closer. By the time they reached a plateau of open rock, the 3 gunmen appeared on the ridge. Bullets hit the rocks at their feet. They took cover behind boulders. We can't outrun them. Victoria said. We're not trying to outrun them, Thomas replied. We make our stand. Here, the first gunman aimed down at them. Thomas fired first, his shot striking true. The man fell. Victoria steadied her revolver and fired next, forcing the second rider back. Bear took off like a shadow, leaping toward the third attacker as he tried to circle around. The gunman shouted, stumbled, and Thomas ended it with one final shot. Silence returned to the mountains. Victoria stared at the fallen men, breathing hard. He sent more. Green won't stop, no, Thomas said, but neither will we. They moved again, faster now, knowing the enemy would not rest. By late afternoon, they reached the mining camp Thomas once knew. Samuel Morrison, a grizzled, loyal veteran, welcomed them inside without question. When Thomas explained everything, Samuel nodded with a grim understanding. You'll need to reach Denver before Green sends half his army. Samuel said there's a supply wagon leaving at dawn. You'll ride hidden. It's your best chance. Morning came too soon. They rode inside the wagon, hidden under crates. For hours, the wagon traveled down rough roads until they reached the city. Denver, noisy, busy, filled with people, but dangerous too. Green's influence was everywhere. Victoria's heart pounded as she walked into the bank to access the safety deposit box. She used her late husband's papers to prove her identity. Inside the box were more documents. Records of land theft, bribes, and illegal deals, enough to expose Charles Green completely. When they stepped out of the bank, Thomas saw the danger instantly. 2 armed men watched them from across the street. Move, he said quietly. Now. They darted into a newspaper office, the Rocky Mountain News. Inside, editor William Byers listened to their story with growing shock and anger as he read. The evidence? If this is true, this is the biggest corruption scandal the West has ever seen. He said, I'll publish it today. But once this goes to print, Green will do anything to silence you. We know. Victoria said, but the truth needs to be told. Byers nodded with respect. You're brave, all of you. He rushed off to prepare the headline. Next, they carried the evidence to Judge Harrison, a federal judge known for honesty. He read the documents with a hard, steady gaze, then looked up. You've done the right thing, he said. Green will be arrested. With this evidence, he won't escape the law. Just then, the doors of the courthouse burst open. Green's men stormed inside with guns drawn. Chaos filled the room. Thomas pulled Victoria behind a pillar. Shots rang out. Bear barked and lunged as men shouted. Judge Harrison stood tall. This is a federal court. Drop your weapons. For the first time, Green's men hesitated. Newsboys suddenly rushed the streets outside, shouting the headline for the entire city to hear. Corruption exposed. Charles Green wanted for fraud. People gathered. Crowds grew. Green's men saw the truth. Too many had heard. Killing Thomas and Victoria would no longer hide the crime. If they murdered them now, the whole city would know Green was behind it. Sirens, U.S. Marshals arrived. Green's men were arrested. The danger at last began to fade. Outside the courthouse, people cheered. Victoria turned to Thomas, tears in her eyes, but this time not from fear. We did it, she whispered. Thomas took her hands gently together. You once lived alone, she said softly. Do you still want that life? Thomas looked at her with a full heart. No, I want a life with you, if you still want me. Victoria smiled, warm and sure. I'm already your wife, and I choose this life with you. They kissed, not as strangers who signed a paper once, but as two souls who fought side by side and found love in the hardest places. Bear barked joyfully, tail wagging, as if sealing their future with his approval. Hand in hand, Thomas and Victoria walked into their new life together, unbroken and no longer alone.